well as how. Of course, what I'm doing here is abbreviating everything I do into one slide, which is a bit ridiculous. I have a book that you can read if you really want to know more. But on the left is the classification that I have been describing for some time now of the various types of damage. All of the things that actually qualify as damage, the various molecular and cellular phenomena that are caused as ongoing accumulating side effects of metabolism, and that we have some reason to believe eventually contribute to age-related ill health. 7 different categories. Each of these categories is a large category, don't get me wrong. There's lots of things going on within each of these categories, but it's a useful classification, mainly because it allows us to write the right-hand side of this slide, namely the various ways in which we might go about addressing these things. Within each of these categories, more or less the same approach is available. And when I say available, what I mean is not necessarily implemented already, in fact in general not implemented already, but definitely foreseeable in the relatively near future for actually addressing these things. And when I say addressing, I emphasize, I do not mean just slowing down the accumulation of the problem. I mean actually reversing it, or in some cases reversing its effects, in other words, essentially obviating it, unlinking it from pathology. So these are the things that I have talked about extensively in all manner of different articles and books and talks over the years, and I'm not going to talk about it now because I don't have time. What I'm going to talk about now is something a little bit more long-term for the next couple of minutes, which is longevity escape velocity. So I've told you so far that the maintenance approach is very promising because it targets the weak link, the natural place, so to speak, in the chain of events that goes from being alive to being dead. It's also good that damage is so much simpler. So I've shown you obviously on the previous slide that we can classify damage, or at least when I say I've shown you what I mean is I've told you, that the damage can be classified into this rather small number of different categories. That's of course much more straightforward, much simpler than what I showed you in respect of metabolism or indeed pathology. So that's good. But the third reason why the maintenance approach is so promising is the one I want to focus on for the next couple of minutes, which is this one down here. Repairing damage buys much more time than slowing down the accumulation of damage. What do I mean by that? Well, this is basically what I mean. This is obviously very schematic, very abstract, but I'm just trying to get a concept across here, so bear with me. I'm not trying to communicate anything quantitative here. What we've got here is a depiction of aging and how we might be able to address it with various types of technology. So on the x-axis I've got age, and on the y-axis I've got damage. I'm saying reserve here, but reserve is not a new concept I'm introducing here, it's just the inverse of damage, really. It's the amount of additional damage that you could afford to accumulate before things start going wrong. So what I'm saying basically is the red line is natural aging. You've got people being born at age 0, obviously, and they've got a lot of reserve, not a lot of damage. They accumulate damage, their reserve falls. Eventually they get down to this dotted line that I'm calling the frailty threshold, which is when pathology starts to happen. And then, of course, there's not much for them after that. They're not very happy for a while. The pink line is what I've told you so far. Essentially that within the next little while we're going to be able to I think we have a good chance anyway of being able to rather effectively combat damage. Now I want to take you back for a moment on this slide because I did say here 30 years of additional healthy life. And that's the milestone that I've defined as robust human rejuvenation. What I'm expecting to happen is that these technologies will be able to give us about this amount of extra life. They will not be 100% perfect, but they'll be pretty good. And I think we have a 50-50 chance of getting to this point within maybe 25 years from now. Alright, so what does that mean? What it means is this pink line. We're going to be able to take people who are already in middle age before we do anything to them. Okay, let's say 60 years old for sake of argument. We'll be able to fix up quite a lot of their damage, let's say half of their damage. And when I say half, I don't just mean half the categories, I mean within each category half the damage, because we can't leave any category untouched or they'll screw us over anyway. So we do this. Now, since we're not proposing to interfere with the rate of creation of damage, what we're going to see is after that, a rate of aging, a rate of accumulation of damage, depletion of reserve, that is the same as what we see in normal aging, the red line. Okay? But after that, we can apply the therapy again, and again, and again, and that's what the rest of this zigzag line denotes. Now, of course, the point I'm trying to get across with the pink line is that we hit diminishing return. That we have to apply the therapy more and more frequently and we have less and less effect. Why is that? Very straightforward, very clearly depicted here, namely that the therapies are not perfect, and the sense in which they're not perfect is that there is some sort of partitioning between easy damage, by definition the damage that the therapy works on, and difficult damage that it doesn't work on. The difficult damage is continuing to accumulate unabated through this period, so that eventually on its own, even however well we are fixing the easy damage, the hard damage is going to be enough to tip our hero over the frailty threshold, and so that's what we get. So the key point I want to communicate with this slide is, of course, denoted by the orange line. What the hell is the orange line? Well, the key point here is that this timeline is rather long. If you and I were mice, and the x-axis here, on which I had carefully put no numbers, was like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then that would be the end of my story. But we're not mice, we're humans who age 30 times more slowly, which means that the interval between the first and second applications of these therapies I'm talking about is going to be quite a long time, maybe 20 years. Now 20 years, of course, is one hell of a long time, even today, let alone in the future, in technology, including biomedical technology. Which means that actually it's completely unrealistic to suppose that this pink line, the second segment of the pink line, would be a good depiction of what's going to happen. What's actually going to happen is that at this point, 20 years down the road, the person who was treated 20 years previously, who comes in for his second rejuvenation, will not actually receive the same therapies that fix the types of damage that could be fixed 20 years previously. The therapies they're going to receive are improved ones, which fix not only those types of damage, but also some proportion, let's say for sake of argument half, of the difficult damage that could not be fixed 20 years previously. And that's what the first segment of the orange line denotes. Now, I probably don't need to go much further, really, because it's bleeding obvious what results from that. You just don't get this diminishing return. You've got this situation where this person is rejuvenated not only better than they would have been if they'd received the old therapies, but actually better than they were 20 years previously, when they were chronologically 20 years younger. So in other words, the problem is harder because you've got a larger proportion of hard damage to fix, but that increased difficulty is outweighed by the increased sophistication, increased comprehensiveness of the technology. And of course, if we iterate on that, and this is what we see, that over the long term, our hero becomes biologically younger as they become chronologically older, and we don't get this diminishing returns, we see an indefinite escape from the frailty threshold. We never get anywhere near it. And that's why I end up being able to talk about indefinite extension of lifespan of people who are already alive today, and perhaps even people who are already in this room today. So that's essentially the fundamental concept I want to get across. And what, of course, it gives us is a concept of a threshold of how fast the technologies need to be improved. This is a particular rate. There's some sort of threshold where we just stay horizontal, where we just stay ahead of the frailty threshold. And I have given a name to that rate of progress. I called it longevity escape velocity. This is what it is. It's simply the rate at which these rejuvenation therapies need to be improved following that initial breakthrough where we fixed roughly half the damage and we've achieved this 30-year increase. Okay, in order that they will outpace the accumulation of the damage that they cannot yet fix. So it's a very wordy concept when written out in words, but a very simple idea as you've just seen. All right, that's all the easy stuff that those of you who are familiar with my work have all heard before. And the next probably 8 minutes, I'll talk about some other stuff. So a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, Paul Hynek, coined this term. He said, well, we need a word to describe the point at which we reach longevity escape velocity. Because one thing I'll be showing you in a moment is that there's likely to be only one such point. In other words, when we reach it, it's astronomically unlikely that we will ever fall below it again. Once we get to the point where we're postponing aging faster than time is passing, we're just going to definitely carry on that way. So he said, well, the Methuselarity is a nice word because it evokes the singularity. And the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about why the concept of reaching longevity escape velocity is realistic in the first place. We don't have any direct evidence, of course, because we haven't got anywhere near this yet in terms of our progress against aging, our progress in applying regenerative medicine to the problem of aging. But we can look at other technologies and we can identify a very clear theme, a very clear generalization, which is that there's a contrast between fundamental breakthroughs and incremental refinements of those breakthroughs. And the big contrast is with regard to the predictability of the rate of progress. So it took one hell of a long time to get to this point. You know, Leonardo da Vinci probably thought he was only 20 years away from making these things work, okay, and he was wrong, and a lot of other people in the meantime were also wrong, but the Wright brothers were right, and they, obviously, here they are. And after that, you know, progress was very smooth and very rapid. And of course you can argue, well, okay, why did progress stop right here? Where are our flying cars then? But of course we know the answer to that.